So please, everyone, join me in welcoming our keynote speaker today, Sir Tim Berners-Lee.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me. And it's good to talk about open source. What I'll do is I'll talk just a little bit about the original, or the origins of the web 30 years ago. Time flies when you're having fun. And how open source was important then. Even though back, in 1989, open source wasn't a word, but the concept was, and the concept, in fact, was really important. Now I'll talk about sort of the trajectory of the web a bit since then, and now how, with the latest project, the movement that I'm launching called Solid, how open source again is core, and in a way now it's even more crucial to the project, to the movement, than it was before. So to go back then to 1989, so the web and the internet are different. You guys know that. A lot of people out there don't. So people who, for example, who weren't alive between 1969 and 1989, but 1969 the internet was invented. Vint Cerf and company produced TCP and IP, and they connected these networks together. Originally, that sometimes the computers had to dial each other up, and then they got leased lines, and then they got used different technologies to connect the networks together. But so between 1969 and 1989, the internet was pretty much had spread mainly across American universities, because that's where DARPA had funded American research groups to install it. So that meant that anywhere on the internet, you could write a program, run on a computer, and you could ask it to connect to any computer anywhere else on the internet. And it would and the internet system would route these packets through. And so they had the infrastructure, they had the idea, they had the concepts, they had the deployed code, they had the standards. Well, from the European point of view, I was working in Switzerland, and there was a certain amount of snobbishness about these Americans who didn't use who used the stuff which wasn't an international standards organization standard. And so ISO was in fact working on it, on ISO TP4, Transport Protocol Level 4, and we were supposed to wait for that to come out and use that. But there's some good buddies of mine, my colleagues said, just use the internet, it works. And so here's a tape of the code to run on your VAX machine or whatever it was. And so so the situation I was in was there was email, there was file transfer protocol, which is a rather clunky way of getting files across the web, across the internet, but there was no websites, no HTTP, no HTML, so I had to invent those. Fortunately, my boss allowed me to do it as a spare time thing, because CERN is a physics place. I made a memo about the project, but there wasn't really a place I could take it at CERN to do it. He let me do it in my spare time. Unfortunately, he got cancer at that point, and when he died 10 years later, and when his wife went through, Peggy went through his things, they found the original copy that I'd given him of this memo, and written in the corner, in his handwriting on the front cover, it said, "Vague but exciting." And so Mike Sendel thought it was vague and exciting, and as a result, he allowed me to do it in my spare time. Lesson to you guys: if somebody works with you, is doing something that you think is vague but exciting, let them have the spare time. Give them some 20% time to see what happens to it. There's from that point on, he allowed me to buy a Next machine. Anybody here ever seen a Next machine? So they were really, really nifty. There was not very many. The Next machine was a very, very cool black magnesium cube with heat sinks. It was like a sort of it looked like a sort of cross between a stack of albums and a motorbike. And inside it had really nifty things. And inside, one of the things it had was for this sort of produced by Steve Jobs when he on his sort of pirate competition to Apple. This next box had in it the really, really neat developer software. So it had the interface builder and an application builder, so that if you want to make an app, then in fact the code I was using then that ran on the Next, he then took back into Apple, and if you build an app for an iPhone, basically is the lineage of that, the code you're using was this application builder. So I could build a web browser. I built a web browser. It was in fact a web editor because I believed that the web should be a read-write thing. Back then, anything that you had access to, you should be able to edit it and just edit. Make a link. If you think these two things should be linked, you could just highlight something, click mark, highlight something else, click link to marked, and it would make a link between the two. And then you save them both back. And that was how the web was supposed to work. It was supposed to be a read-write web. That original code was released. Open source wasn't such a big thing. Just on the internet, everybody shared their code. Open source wasn't such a big thing. And people started, we ported the code I wrote for the Next in Objective-C, had to port it to C, which is much more boring, basic, more portable language, to port to other things. So we had it running, for example, on the IBM mainframe, and so that we could make a web server to export the CERN phone book, which was a crucial early killer app for some of the people at CERN and the hydrogen physics community. But we just traded all this code. But then the Gopher system, which was competing. In fact, if you look at the logs of if you look at the National Science Foundation backbone traffic, Gopher was going like this. The amount of Gopher traffic on the backbone, and the web was exponential, but behind it. And then at one point, the Gopher folks, the University of Minnesota, who owned Gopher, sent around a message which said, this only applies to you if you're running a server. So if you're just running a Gopher client, don't worry. And if you're academic, don't worry. Only if you're commercial. And now, don't worry, but possibly down the line, if you were running a server and if you're commercial, we might possibly charge a fee, little. And so Gopher traffic, you can see, that memo was published, you can see the Gopher traffic dropped off. Gopher died because Gopher wasn't open. Gopher wasn't royalty free. And immediately people came to me at the engineering task force meetings and said, so what about the web? Can we switch everything to the web? Is it free? Have you got a commitment from? And I said, I said, well, don't charge anything for it. They said, no, we need a commitment. So it was in 1993 that we managed to get an official stamped by the director of CERN. CERN's a big institute, didn't really understand about open source stuff, but we said, no, this is really, really important. You have to say CERN will not be charging royalties for this project. So CERN will not be charging royalties for this project. Big director stamp, scanned it, put it on the web. The web took off and is now. And so to a certain extent, that was absolutely crucial. That was 1993. Another point, 2003, when the Web Consortium, when I'd gone to MIT and started this Web Consortium as an international international thing. Also, it was really crucial that all the people who joined the consortium send their engineers to help make all the standards the same. It needed to know that it was royalty free, and so in 2003, the Web Consortium making a royalty free patent policy, which was a very complicated thing to do, because it has to enumerate the stages by which people join, and as they join the working group and as they bring their ideas in, how they declare that they won't charge any royalties. Whatever patents they have, it'll be this spec will be royalty free. So royalty free has been really, really important, and open source code has as well. In fact, talking to some of the people after the fact, going back to people who were in the US government when the web was new, back in the early 90s, they said, well, the great thing about all this web stuff, from the point of view of IT, putting IT on a desktop, and you remember, in the government, we had all these procurement things. If we wanted to get a word processor, we'd have to go through a comparative study of all the word processors out there. We'd have to get bids, go through procurement policy about open source stuff. This web stuff, we just FTP it down onto our laptops and set it running. And so it spread. So the web spread through government very quickly. They all downloaded Mosaic, and later Netscape, and later, and so on. So for some people, it was more important than others. But I always felt that the web ecosystem needed to be rich and have all kinds of stuff for free, and also people some stuff which was supported free software, and some stuff which is for pay commercial software. That's so that whoever you are out there, whatever your needs are, then you can find what you want. So the web took off. Looking at the hits on the first web server, they went up from sort of 10 a day to 100 a day over the next year, and to 1,000 a day to 10,000 a day. And when you put it on a log graph paper, so that you put a straight line through it. So basically, this was every year, it was the load on just the first web server went up by a factor of 10. And so, people say, when did you realize it was going to, when did it really explode? Actually, it was constantly exploding ever since it started. And that's been amazing. And now it's got to the point where half the people, this year we've celebrated half the people in the world are online. So that this exponential is getting to the point where hopefully it'll go rushing through 50%. Although we're worried that actually it may be tapering off, it slowed down a little bit for some reason. But then, of course, since then we've founded the Web Foundation, which worries about making sure the web serves humanity, and also worries about the other 50%, for example. So we need to go to a certain amount of effort to make sure that in developing countries that there aren't unreasonable taxes, that you don't give monopoly providers the ability to sort of gouge the taxes, make sure that the on-ramp for people getting online with their phones, with really, really cheap laptops. Make sure that on-ramp is the data plan is really low. We used to be worrying about the price of devices, but now the price of that devices has, since over the last few years, has become, is not the problem. So getting the rest of the people online is about getting data plan price down. So this thing has exploded. It's done pretty well. But the original web browser was a web editor, and it was supposed to be a read-write thing, and it was supposed to be very collaborative. And I wanted to be able to use it to be able to just share ideas with people. And the web mainly became a publishing medium, and then as a publishing medium, to a certain extent, people were very excited about it. So if you go back 15 years, it's worth mentioning that at that point, it was exciting because people were blogging. And when you blogged, so you could connect your computer to the internet, you could download the web server software, you could download blog software, you could write a blog, you could link to other people's blog, other people would link to you, and you would be part of this world of people who blogged. And you would make your blog as good as possible, and so that other people would link to it. And you would be kept very careful that when you linked to it, when you linked to other blogs, you only linked to ones which you thought were worth reading. And so the way the blogosphere worked is that you had this, you got the impression that, here I am trying to do my bit, but meanwhile, all this stuff around me is growing up, where other people I don't know are creating blogs about all kinds of things. And in fact, the blogosphere is becoming this incredible resource, and I'm contributing. I'm doing my little bit. And so the way the web worked, in fact, the blogosphere, to a certain extent, was an unintended but beneficent consequence of the way, if you put bloggers together, how they all try to bisect, because they're all selecting, only linking to the things that they think are good. They're curating their own, they're creating the blogosphere. The bloggers themselves curate the blogosphere. And so that was very, very, and back in the day, then people thought that this was very special because they said, look, unlike other things, unlike TV, you only have a few TV stations. But if you look at the distribution of, you look at the most popular website, then the next most popular website, that was the next most popular website. Actually, instead of it dropping off like this tail of the distribution went on and on and on. It's called the long tail, and all of the value. Most of the value, or a large proportion of it, within the small and medium enterprises and the blogs. And the people wrote books about the long tail. They call this phenomenon the long tail, and it represented a huge amount of value. And so, and now we've lost the long tail because everybody's on the same website. What you read is not so much determined by the links you follow between different blogs, but it's you go to Facebook, and a lot of people go. You may not. But a lot of people go to Facebook, and it depends. What they read depends on what the algorithm dishes out. So there are a number of ways in which that sort of the 15 years ago me has been just which was all excited about the web becoming really beneficial for humanity. Okay, there's a lot of it, but on the other hand, the aspirations we'd had that it would be a very beneficent and democracy-supporting thing to a certain extent have been. We've had to step back and realize that there's fake news. Actually, people are using Facebook ads to manipulate people to vote in ways which are not in their best interests. And so democracy, to a certain extent, the Brexit vote and the Trump vote are complicated, but actually there's lots and lots of things going on, and lots of it is about systems on the web. So we fought to keep the web free and open, and we still do. People fought to get the internet free and open. But now we realize that you can keep the web free and open, and then people will build things like Twitter and Facebook on top of it. And what happens on top of that, Facebook you build something like a WhatsApp network, and you leave it encrypted. You think you're doing all the right things, and then you find the way you've built the network allows people to be manipulated into performing genocide in Myanmar, for example. So that so life is much more complicated now. There are many responses to this. I think a lot of people. So there's been a big pushback, for example, about privacy. A lot of people are worried that wait a minute, when people were manipulated to the Facebook targeted ads, which convinced people of lots of fake news in the election, they were made using this huge database of the likes and dislikes of people, and that includes my data. And so some people said, no, I'm just going to leave Facebook because I don't want to be part of it. And some people said incorrectly, yeah, if they got money if people are selling your data, you should get some of the money. No, that's the point. That's not the point. It's not that these people want to be recompensed for it's not about monetizing. Monetizing data actually was a thing. Like 4 years ago, it was very popular. Everybody had to monetize their data, but actually, monetizing the data was a distraction. It's not about getting money back to the user. It's about rebuilding a broken democracy. And it's building systems which are actually constructive, getting people to building social networks which are constructive. So how can we get back? The blogosphere was a time when people felt enabled. They felt peers out there, peers with anybody. You could publish a blog, and you would go head to head with a blog published by the famous journalists. And so how can we bring that back? Well, one of the things we can do is we can bring back the concept of the ReadWrite Web. So originally, the idea was that everybody should have a website. But actually, the idea was everybody should have a read-write space. So in fact, the web shouldn't just be something which you browse through. It should be something which you should be able to block. You should be able to comment about anything. You should be able to have a conversation. You and I should meet on the web talking about something, and we should be able to create just a chat between the two of us, which we can point other people to if we want, or if we can then later turn and ask the other people to join the chat, we should be able to turn that into a group. And when we turn that into a group, we should be able to do all kinds of things, like organize meetings and track action items and so on. We should be able to live a collaborative, scientific, journalistic, whatever life on the web. And so so the Solid project, which came out of, we had at MIT, was about moving in that direction. We were saying you should have a space of web on the web which is read-write, and we can build apps, and the apps are separate from the data. So the data store is all stored on something. Maybe it's stored in Postgres. Maybe it's stored in a graph store. But what's interesting about it is, in this concept, is the backend is generic. So you have just one API. It's like giving giving the front-end programmer the ability to create tables in a world of, you can create files, like a big file space, you can create tables, you can create graphs, you can represent anything in graphs. And because this infrastructure, the data infrastructure, just allows you to represent any data structure, it means that the server code doesn't know anything, doesn't care what app is being used. And so it means it's just one API, so once you've got a solid server, then you're done. You've developed a solid server, then any app can use it. What it does have to do is access control. One of the things that we haven't really done before is have a global single sign-on and with access control going along with it. So if you share something, Dropbox is a bit like a Solid server. It doesn't support the Solid protocol yet. Hopefully it will. But when you share something with somebody in Dropbox, then you can share it with more or less anybody. You don't have a very strong system of groups, as far as I know. And when you share it with people, you have to share it with their Dropbox ID. Somebody has to then log on and get an account with Dropbox. But in Solid, you can share. It doesn't matter whether somebody's got their account from Dropbox or from Google or Facebook or Interrupt.net or Solid.community, whatever service provider they've got their account with, you can put them in an access control list. So you can drag their ID. So I can have just one professional ID, and you can all take photographs of this conference, and you can then put them in a folder in a Solid server, and you can use the access control on the Solid server to give me access to it once you know my ID. You can also, you can drag in all kinds of people by their ID, no matter where they are, no matter who hosts their ID. And you can also drag in any groups, and you can create a group, and you can put any people in the group. So it's what we've said is the basic sorts of things that you do within Dropbox or within Facebook or Google with groups and so those become first-class objects. Those are standardized. In Solid, then all of the servers have to understand access control. But once they've done that, so once I've shared that with somebody, then I can build apps to do whatever I like. So I can, we've got apps running our lives. We've got apps we've got chat apps, for example. So in Solid, you can chat about anything. So we've got, you can create a meeting. You can chat about the meeting. You can have a meeting about the chat. You can create a to-do list. You can create an issue tracker. And all these things, you can just store it. And when you start the app, it says, where do you want this stored? Where do you want this stored? And you can have many different, we call them pods. So you have a Solid pod. Your Solid pod, you have one at home. I have one at home running on a computer. I'm a geek. So I've installed the Solid server on a Mac Mini, which is sitting at home. because I can, and I back it up to the cloud, and just in case. So a bunch of people have done that, but most people just get accounts at different storage providers. But then the crucial thing about Solid is that we've separated the apps from the data storage, and so so that you can use different apps. In fact, you can use multiple different apps on the same data. You can be using one photo manager library app to manage a slideshow, for example, of the vacation, and your family can be using completely different photo library apps. And so open source here is really, really cool because, there will be commercial versions of these, but at the moment, most of this stuff is open source. So if you're a developer and you're using this photo library, or I'm looking through the photo, somebody's slideshow, and I think, but I want this slideshow doesn't even go backwards. How come it doesn't go backwards? That's crazy. I want to put it in a mode where it goes backwards. So where's the button? Oh, fort me on GitHub. Here we are. This is where the GitHub code is. We live in a world of GitHub now. Well, I don't know. Maybe you use other ones, other systems, GitLab, and so on. And it's true that GitHub is a dominant central repository. We realize that in a perfect decentralized world, as we decentralize the web, that we should all be using GitHub, but it is pretty nifty that when you go to the Solid organization on GitHub, and you can just look down through the apps, and you can pick one, and you can fork it, and you make your own version. And if you wanted a pink background instead of a blue background, you can do that. And it may be that your version with the pink background becomes more popular. And so people, because it's completely interoperable with all the other photo editors out there, it spreads, because pink is the color of 2090. And so you release the code for your pink version of the app, and you think no more about it. Because the way Solid works is the apps are separate from the data. You just release the code. So people can set up their systems to use your photo library editor instead of the default one. When somebody somebody sends the link to a photo, or when they download they set their phone up so that when they take the photos, they download a reel of film. Then the reel of film goes into their SolidPod, the homework pod or the work pod, depending on what the job is, and they will end up using your app instead because they'll just set up as a default. And so you sit back and you don't have to worry about it, but because you don't have to develop a backend, so that if you develop a Postgres or SQL-based things, then if you want to add a new table, then if you want to change the backend, then there's a backend work to do. Because Solid, we've generalized that, so we have one. So we have one API, and so that you could go just release your pink version of the photo library and wake up the following morning and find that people all over the world are using it. And they're using it, all their SolidPods. So there's a lot of internet traffic. So they picked up the code, which is now sitting in lots of browsers or lots of desktops, and they're running it on their own SolidPod. So your app, you don't have to do any backend development. Your app can get picked up and used, and you will get used by people all over the world on existing servers out there. So it's a different world for developers. It's a different world for users. To a certain extent, it's really empowering. It's a different world for developers. It's very different. 1990. It's worth mentioning. There wasn't a GitHub then. So even though all the technology existed for having it, well, we didn't have Git. We had CVS, I guess. But typically, what you would do is you would download Apache, for example. You'd go to an FTP site and you'd download the Apache tar file. So this Apache would come as a lump, and you'd untar it and you'd install it. And hopefully somebody had gone to the trouble of making it so that on your particular system it would work. And you install all these files, and you'd run the configuration process, and you'd run the build, make process, and the build process, and the install process, and then you'd have Apache running. And then you would have a web server. And well, Apache, of course, still is it's a big part of the web. Lots of people have Apache servers. And, but Apache was a very monolithic chunk. Whereas now you can, so now the equivalent would be you download Express, say a node. But when you download Express, it pulls in, it's a little bit of code, which pulls in a whole bunch of other bits of code, and submodules and submodules and submodules. And in fact, when you install it, you're pulling in dependencies which are fulfilled by submodules written by all kinds of people. And in fact, there are some issues out there about what happens if somebody deliberately or accidentally breaks a module which actually is, somebody unpublished at one point, because there was a battle about the name of a project. And so somebody said, all right, I'll unpublish it. You can use the name for something else. And they unpublished it, and huge amounts of stuff broke. so we have a systematic failure. But apart from possible failure modes, now we're in a world where I don't actually write an Apache anymore. I just write a little part of it. I imagine a web server which has got some function in it. I decide I want to use a different form of access control or something. So I'll write an access control module, and I'll pull in all of the other pieces. I don't write, the way to do it as a developer now is I don't write code, I search for it. I search for it in NPM or whatever your favorite package manager is. So search for it on the web. And typically the problem is, if I think of almost any function you can imagine writing, I've got too many of them out there. There are 18 different ways of converting a content type into a file extension or something. And I have to find which are the best ones. I have to use star ratings or after friend, or have a big. So the problem is there's so much stuff out there. It's an embarras de choix. I have to take time actually changing the choosing which one to use. But but that's a good problem to have. It means that I certainly don't have to write this thing. It means that I can. So it means that then it also means that we used to be taught to make. The world taught us to make modular things. So Apache is modular. It breaks down into pieces. But now the mental thing isn't. Yes, I'm going to make this out of pieces, of course, but more importantly, perhaps, I'm going to think about it as being a piece of something bigger. And so that mental model, I'm building this. I'm building my photo library, but just the pink piece, or just like the photo library editor, it's not going to make it just a new photo library manager. I'm going to actually just the pink background style. I'm just going to fork that off as something separate, so anybody can apply my pink background to anything, any project in the world, because and then it will solve. And anybody searching for a way of doing it in pink, for example, will be able to pull that in and use it. So open source at the moment is really, really crucial. The Solid project is all based on it. We have a startup which has been around, which has been public for sort of visible above the radar for less than a year. We've got so it's Inrupt, INRUPT, and Inrupt's goal is that Solid should succeed first, and then. Well, what are revenue models? Well, there are lots and lots of revenue models. There's a long list of things that we can do. So we could, we could do Red Hat style. We could provide support to the existing stuff. We could make a commercial version, a complete for pay commercial version of the whole thing, of the whole stack. We could do things in various stages in between. We could. One of the things we thought about doing is running. We could run an app store. at the moment, Solid needs an app store. Somebody's got to produce an app store. One possibility is that when you've got, for example, we're in a different place in the world. There's all of the bad things that went down mean that the spirit out there is, and people on the street, is they are ready for, and to a certain extent, they're starting a backlash. There's a backlash against the way the world has been working. And part of that, for example, when fake news people realized fake news was a thing, and they immediately, the subscriptions to the New York Times went up. Subscriptions in general to news sources went up. I, for one, so I have subscriptions to a bunch of things, like 4 or 5 things that I pay money to. And a lot of people I know feel that they want to be paying money that goes into the hands of a journalist who is working for them, who is working to figure out the truth. And when you look at apps, when you have people, there's a backlash ready against advertising as well, against clickbait. Even somebody who is a professional BBC producer who researches stuff on the web admitted that they waste some of their time during the day because of clickbait, because clickbait is so good. It's just, the link is so tasty, so delicious, you can't avoid clicking on it. It leads you to some stupid ad for insurance, which is completely different. So clickbait is kind of abusive. So whatever happened to the web actually working for you, whatever happened to be us being empowered, whatever happened to, so those people are prepared to pay for an app. So with one idea is that we say, look, there are going to be some apps where you don't have advertising, you don't have monetization of data, you don't have any exploitation of the user. If you don't exploit the user, you're working for the user. You are the user's agent. The browser is called the user agent, technically, and that's because the browser works for you, and all the other apps you use should be your agent as well. So if we have, well, maybe use the word beneficent, because if you do experiments at MIT with human subjects, you have to show that they're beneficent. That's a nice term. Basically, it brings good rather than bad. So supposing we define what a beneficent app is. We have beneficent stores. Beneficent stores are things that don't spy on you. There are lots of beneficent stores. Like basically, Dropbox is a beneficent store. Their business model is not to spy on you, and they don't. And the store can't really flood you with advertising. So, but supposing we have all the things that you use day to day, the chat apps, the meeting management apps, all the productivity apps, all the communication apps, the collaboration apps, all the apps you use for doing science and you do for reviewing things. Imagine that you have ability to go to the beneficent app store, and you can set up your kids' computers so that they, no matter what age they are, they will only be using, as they do their homework, they will be using beneficent apps. So they won't. Will you pay for them? Maybe you'll pay for beneficent apps, just like people pay to be able to have a news feed for a journalist. Maybe there will be, certainly all the open source software out there is pretty much automatically all beneficent. Open source software doesn't have ads. Open source software has been written by developers for as service, imagining how can I serve the user? At each point, if I'm using this app, how would I use it? And a lot of open source developers are users who are motivated because they want a really powerful app. They want powerful tools. They want tools that they can use to solve problems quickly. They want to be able to collaborate so that we can solve huge problems like climate change and curing cancer. And so the world that I see here is of a massive backlash and of beneficent apps playing a role. And of course, the open source apps out there are almost all beneficent. So I hope this is going to be really empowering. I hope it'll empower me as a person. I hope it'll empower all of you to be much more powerful in your daily lives, make your companies more efficient, and hopefully the tools we build also will be democratic tools. And so the democratic tools for helping people come to conclusions, like the Wikipedia process. We should be able to invoke the Wikipedia process produces a lot of basically good, pretty close approximations to the truth, with a lot of process and appeals and things. But we need more democratic processes so that we have science and we have democracy, which are the sort of pillars of our whole world. And we have the web should, in future, in this new beneficent world with beneficent app and beneficent stores, support us very much more. Thank you.